At 3:47 a.m. on March 15, 2019, Sarah Mitchell dialed 911 with trembling fingers. Her voice cracked as she told the operator, "My husband, he's gone. There's blood everywhere and his car is still in the driveway." When the operator asked if she was injured, Sarah replied, "No. But David, something terrible has happened to David." That phone call would launch one of the most baffling missing person cases in recent memory. David Mitchell, a 42-year-old successful businessman, had vanished without a trace from his suburban home. But this wasn't just any disappearance. The evidence left behind painted a picture so disturbing, so contradictory, that 4 years later, investigators still can't agree on what really happened that night. Was David Mitchell the victim of a violent crime? Did he stage his own disappearance? Or is someone in his inner circle hiding a deadly secret? I'm your host, bringing you another deep dive investigation from Crime Vault. What you're about to hear includes never-before-released evidence, exclusive interviews, and revelations that will make you question everything you think you know about this case. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you incredible Crime Vault viewers. Your support, your comments, your theories, they fuel our investigations and help us bring attention to cases that deserve answers. Many of you have been requesting more unsolved cases, and today we're diving deep into a mystery that has stumped law enforcement for over 4 years. This is a complex case with multiple suspects, conflicting evidence, and a timeline that just doesn't add up. So grab your detective notebooks because we're about to unpack 60 minutes of evidence, interviews, and shocking revelations. And remember, your theories in the comments might just help crack this case wide open. To understand what happened on that March night, we need to go back to the beginning. David Mitchell seemed to have it all. Born in 1977, David grew up in the quiet suburb of Millbrook Heights. He was the kind of man neighbors described as reliable, hardworking, and devoted to his family. After graduating from State University with a business degree, he started his own consulting firm, Mitchell & Associates. In 2001, David married Sarah Chen, a nurse he met at a charity fundraiser. Friends described their relationship as solid, built on shared values and mutual respect. By 2005, they had 2 children, Emma, now 19, and Jake, now 17. The Mitchell family lived in a 2-story colonial home on Maple Street, complete with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Charlie. To the outside world, they represented the American dream. Their neighbor Margaret Peterson told investigators, they were the kind of family you'd want as neighbors. David was always helping people, whether it was jump-starting your car or lending tools. Sarah was involved in every school fundraiser. They just seemed normal, but as we'll discover, even the most perfect facades can hide disturbing secrets. David's business, Mitchell & Associates, specialized in helping small companies streamline their operations. His client list included restaurants, retail stores, and service companies throughout the Tri-County area. Former client Robert Hayes told police, "David saved my restaurant. We were bleeding money, couldn't figure out where it was going. He came in, restructured everything, and within 6 months we were profitable again." The man was a wizard with numbers. By 2018, the business was generating over $200,000 annually. David drove a new BMW. The family took yearly vacations to Europe, and they had just finished renovating their kitchen. But success in business doesn't always translate to happiness at home. And as we'll learn, David Mitchell was carrying burdens that even his closest friends didn't know about. Family friend Lisa Rodriguez later reflected, "Looking back now, there were signs. David seemed stressed the last few months before he disappeared. Sarah mentioned he was working late more often, taking calls at odd hours, but we all just assumed it was business pressure. The pressure was mounting, but from what? And more importantly, was it enough to make a man abandon everything he'd worked for?" March 14, 2019, started like any other Thursday in the Mitchell household. David had breakfast with his family, drove to work, and according to his calendar, had 3 client meetings scheduled. His assistant, Jennifer Walsh, says David seemed normal that day, perhaps a bit distracted, but nothing that raised red flags. Jennifer told investigators he had his usual coffee, checked his emails, made some calls. "The only thing that struck me as odd was that he asked me to cancel his Friday appointments, said he might be taking a long weekend. That wasn't like him. David never took unplanned time off." At 5:30 p.m., David left the office. Security cameras show him walking to his car alone, briefcase in hand. What happened next would be the last confirmed sighting of David Mitchell. David stopped at Murphy's gas station at 6:15 p.m. The attendant, Maria Santos, remembers the interaction clearly. She told police he seemed normal, maybe a little quiet, bought gas, a bottle of water, and asked for directions to Highway 95. "I thought it was strange because he lived in the opposite direction, but people take different routes home all the time." Highway 95 leads to several locations: the airport, the interstate, and notably the Riverside storage facility. At the time, no one knew why David would be heading in that direction. David arrived home at 7:45 p.m., later than usual but not unprecedented. The family had dinner together. Sarah had made his favorite meal, beef stew with homemade bread. In a phone interview, Sarah Mitchell recalled, "That night seemed completely normal. We talked about Emma's college applications, Jake's upcoming soccer game. David helped with dishes, which he always did. There was nothing that made me think it would be our last dinner together." After dinner, the family watched a movie, a comedy that had them all laughing. The children went to bed around 10 p.m. David and Sarah stayed up until 11:30, watching the news and discussing weekend plans. Sarah says David seemed tired but not upset. He kissed her goodnight and said he might stay up a bit longer to finish some work emails. It was the last conversation she would ever have with her husband. But what happened after Sarah went to bed would become the most crucial and mysterious part of this entire case. Coming up, the timeline of David's disappearance gets more confusing and will reveal the evidence that has investigators baffled to this day. According to Sarah, she went to bed at 11:30 p.m., leaving David downstairs in his home office. She says she fell asleep immediately and didn't wake until her alarm at 6:30 a.m. But neighbor Tom Bradley tells a different story. Tom told investigators, "I was up late that night, couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard voices coming from the Mitchells' backyard. It sounded like an argument, a man and a woman. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was definitely heated." Tom says the argument lasted about 10 minutes, followed by what sounded like a car door slamming and an engine starting. When confronted with this information, Sarah maintains she was asleep and heard nothing. But cell phone records paint a more complex picture. David's phone showed activity until 1:47 a.m. Text messages, internet searches, and one outgoing call that lasted 3 minutes. The recipient of that call, Jessica Torres, a woman whose relationship with David would soon become a central part of this investigation. But here's where it gets really strange. At 2:15 a.m., David's phone pinged the cell tower on Riverside Road, nearly 20 miles from his home. Then at 2:33 a.m., it went dark forever. Sarah Mitchell says she woke up at 6:30 a.m. to an empty bed. Assuming David had fallen asleep in his office, she went downstairs to wake him for work. Sarah later recounted, "His office was empty. The computer was still on, papers scattered on the desk. I called his name, checked the garage. His car was still there. That's when I started to worry." Sarah searched the house, called David's cell phone repeatedly, and eventually checked with his assistant to see if he'd gone to work early. When Jennifer confirmed she hadn't seen him, Sarah called the police. But it was what officers found when they arrived that transformed a missing person case into something much more sinister. Responding officer James Murphy told investigators, "When we got there, Mrs. Mitchell was visibly upset, pacing around the front yard. She led us inside, and immediately we could see signs of a struggle in the kitchen. The kitchen told a story of violence. A chair was overturned, there were scuff marks on the tile floor, and most disturbing of all, droplets of blood leading from the kitchen island to the back door. The blood trail stopped at the threshold. Outside, investigators found more evidence that someone had been dragged across the lawn. Disturbed grass, broken branches on nearby shrubs." Detective Carol Jenkins explained, "The scene was consistent with an abduction or struggle that moved from inside the house to outside. But what puzzled us was that David's wallet, keys, and wedding ring were still on the kitchen counter, exactly where someone might empty their pockets before bed." Within hours, the Mitchell home was swarming with investigators. Crime scene technicians processed evidence while detectives began interviewing family members and neighbors. The blood was confirmed to be David's, but the quantity was relatively small, suggesting injury, not a fatal attack. Fingerprint analysis revealed something unexpected. The only prints on the overturned chair belonged to David himself. Detective Jenkins recalled, "That detail bothered me from the beginning. If someone attacked David, why would only his prints be on the chair? It suggested he might have knocked it over himself, either in a struggle or while trying to escape something." Investigators also discovered that the back door, which the blood trail led to, was unlocked. The Mitchells always kept their doors locked at night, according to family members. But the most puzzling evidence was found in David's home office. His computer browser history showed searches for how to disappear, new identity documents, and countries without extradition, all conducted between 1:15 and 1:45 a.m., the night he vanished. When confronted with this evidence, Sarah claimed she had no knowledge of David's internet activity and couldn't explain why he would be researching such topics. As the investigation expanded, a picture began to emerge of a man under increasing pressure, with secrets his family never suspected. Coming up, financial records revealed David's hidden life, and investigators uncover evidence that changes everything they thought they knew about the case. 3 days into the investigation, Detective Jenkins received a call that would crack the case wide open. David's business partner, Marcus Webb, had information that the family didn't know. Marcus told investigators, "I debated whether to come forward, but I realized it might be important." David had been struggling financially for months. The business was failing, and he'd been using company funds to maintain his lifestyle. A forensic audit revealed that Mitchell and Associates was actually hemorrhaging money. Bad investments, unpaid client invoices, and mounting operational costs had put the company nearly $150,000 in debt. But David had been hiding this from his family, continuing to spend as if the business was thriving. The European vacation, the kitchen renovation, Emma's college tuition, all paid for with money the family didn't actually have. Accountant Patricia Clark explained the extent of David's deception. The books were a mess. David had been juggling payments, taking advances from clients, even borrowing against his life insurance policy. He was essentially running a Ponzi scheme to keep his family's lifestyle intact. The life insurance policy was particularly significant. 6 months before his disappearance, David had increased his coverage to $2 million, nearly 4 times the previous amount. When asked about the policy increase, Sarah claimed she was unaware of the change and couldn't explain David's reasoning. In a phone interview, Sarah said, "$2 million? I had no idea. David handled all our finances. I trusted him completely. Why would he need that much coverage?" As investigators dug deeper into David's finances, they discovered regular payments to online gambling sites, totaling over $80,000 in the past year. David had been betting on sports, playing online poker, and even visiting casinos during his supposed business trips. Credit card records showed transactions at gambling establishments in Atlantic City, Las Vegas, and Foxwoods. Dr. Michael Thompson, a gambling addiction counselor, explained the pattern. "This is classic behavior. Someone starts gambling to relieve stress, then begins chasing losses with bigger bets. Before they know it, they're stealing from their business, lying to their family, and spiraling completely out of control." Friends and family were shocked by the revelation. David had never shown any interest in gambling and had even criticized friends who bought lottery tickets as throwing money away. Family friend Lisa Rodriguez reflected, "It's like we didn't know him at all. The David we knew was responsible, conservative with money. He used to lecture us about saving for retirement. How do you hide something like that?" Remember that 3-minute phone call David made at 1:47 a.m. the night he disappeared? It was to Jessica Torres, a 28-year-old marketing consultant whose connection to David ran much deeper than anyone realized. In an interview conducted with her identity protected, Jessica admitted, "I met David about 8 months before he disappeared. He hired my company to help with his marketing, but we started working closely together and eventually, things became personal." Jessica admits to having an affair with David, meeting him at hotels during business hours and communicating through encrypted messaging apps to avoid detection. She explained, "He told me his marriage was over, that he was planning to leave Sarah but wanted to wait until his son graduated high school. I believed him. I thought we had a future together." The night David disappeared, Jessica says he called her in a panic. She recalled he was terrified, said something had happened, that he might have to disappear for a while. "He asked if I would wait for him, if I still loved him. I thought he was being dramatic, maybe having a breakdown from all the financial stress." Jessica's phone records confirm the call, but also reveal something else. Text messages between her and David throughout the previous week, discussing meeting locations and something they referred to as the plan. When pressed about these messages, Jessica becomes evasive. She told investigators, "I don't want to say anything that might hurt him if he's still alive somewhere. David was scared of someone or something, but he made me promise not to tell anyone the details." Jessica's reluctance to fully cooperate would become a major obstacle in the investigation, but she wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Coming up, a storage unit discovery changes everything, and one of the key players finally breaks their silence. 6 weeks into the investigation, a break came from an unexpected source. While processing David's financial records, investigators found monthly payments to Riverside Storage Facility, the same area where his phone had pinged at 2:15 a.m. Detective Jenkins arrived at the facility with a search warrant, not knowing what they might find in Unit 247. Detective Jenkins recalled, "We cut the lock and rolled up that door, and immediately we knew this case was about to take a major turn. The unit was packed with items that told a story we hadn't considered." Inside the 10x10 storage unit, investigators found $15,000 in cash bundled in bank wrappers, a suitcase containing men's clothing and toiletries, a fake passport with David's photo but the name Michael Davidson, detailed maps of Mexico and Central America, and a burner phone with contacts for document forgers. Most shocking of all was a handwritten letter addressed to Sarah and the children, dated 1 week before David's disappearance. The letter read, "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've made mistakes that I can't fix, and people I owe money to are making threats. I can't put you and the kids in danger. Don't look for me. Try to remember the good times. I'm sorry for everything. The letters seemed to confirm that David had planned his own disappearance. But if that was true, what explained the blood evidence and signs of struggle at the house? The storage unit discovery prompted investigators to re-interview everyone connected to the case. It was during the third interview with Jessica Torres that the truth finally emerged. Detective Jenkins explained, I confronted Jessica with the evidence from the storage unit, told her we knew David had been planning to disappear, and that withholding information was obstruction of justice. That's when she finally told us what really happened. Jessica finally revealed the full truth. David called me that night because the plan had gone wrong. He was supposed to stage a break-in, make it look like he'd been kidnapped, then meet me at a predetermined location. We were going to drive to Mexico together and start a new life. According to Jessica, David had researched how to fake his own death, but decided a staged kidnapping would be more believable and wouldn't trigger life insurance fraud investigations. Jessica continued, he cut himself with a kitchen knife to create the blood evidence, knocked over the chair, messed up the grass in the backyard. But when he was walking to his car, someone saw him. That someone was Tom Bradley, the neighbor who reported hearing an argument. But Tom hadn't heard David arguing with an intruder. He'd heard David on the phone with Jessica, panicking because his staged crime scene had been witnessed. Jessica explained, David was terrified that Tom would identify him, that the whole plan would fall apart. He said he was going to the storage unit to get the cash and then figure out what to do next. That was the last time I ever heard from him. Jessica's confession explained most of the evidence, but it raised new questions. If David was planning to meet Jessica in Mexico, why didn't he? What happened between 2:33 a.m. when his phone went dead? And now, the answer came from an unlikely source, Sarah Mitchell herself. In a final interview, Sarah admitted, I lied to the police. I wasn't asleep when David disappeared. I followed him that night. Sarah admits she had suspected David's affair for weeks and had been monitoring his phone activity. When she saw him leave the house at 2 a.m., she followed him to the storage facility. Sarah continued, I watched him go into that unit, saw him come out with a suitcase and envelope. When he got back in his car, I confronted him. We fought right there in the parking lot. He told me everything, the gambling, the debt, Jessica, the plan to disappear. According to Sarah, David begged her to let him go, promised he would send money once he was established somewhere safe. But Sarah had a different idea. She told investigators, I told him if he left I would go to the police immediately, tell them about the staged crime scene, the storage unit, everything. His plan would be ruined and he'd go to prison for insurance fraud and abandonment. Faced with exposure, David agreed to return home and find another solution to their financial problems. But the story doesn't end there. Coming up, the final revelation that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this case. Sarah Mitchell's confession seemed to solve the mystery of David's disappearance, but investigators weren't satisfied. Too many details still didn't add up. Detective Jenkins explained, Sarah's story explained why David never made it to Mexico, but it didn't explain where he went after their confrontation. We pressed her for more details, and eventually the whole truth came out. In a final interview, Sarah revealed the shocking conclusion to that night's events. She said after we argued at the storage facility, David was defeated. He realized his plan had failed, that he was going to have to face the consequences of everything he'd done. He asked me to drive him somewhere quiet so he could think. Sarah says she drove David to Riverside Park, about 5 miles from the storage facility. They sat in the car for over an hour, discussing their marriage, their children, and their impossible financial situation. Sarah continued, David said he couldn't go to prison, couldn't put us through that humiliation. He said there was only one way to solve everything, to make sure we got the insurance money and the kids could still go to college. According to Sarah, David asked her to leave him at the park and go home. He said he would handle things from there and she should stick to her story about waking up to find him missing. Sarah concluded, I should have stopped him. I should have insisted we go home together and figure something else out. But I was angry, hurt, and maybe part of me thought it would be easier if he was just gone. Sarah drove home alone, leaving David at Riverside Park at approximately 4:30 a.m. She never saw him again. Despite extensive searches of Riverside Park and the surrounding area, David Mitchell's body has never been found. The case remains officially open, though investigators believe they now understand what happened that night. Detective Jenkins concluded, based on all the evidence and testimony, we believe David Mitchell took his own life somewhere in the park or nearby wooded area. The terrain is rough, with deep ravines and dense forest. It's possible his remains may never be located. Sarah Mitchell was charged with obstruction of justice for lying to investigators but avoided prison time due to her eventual cooperation. She and her children have since moved to another state to start over. Jessica Torres was never charged, though her involvement in the planned fraud scheme raised ethical questions about her business practices. The Mitchell family home was eventually sold to pay off David's debts. The life insurance policy was never paid out due to questions about the circumstances of his disappearance. So what do you think happened to David Mitchell? Was this a carefully planned suicide designed to look like a disappearance? Did he actually escape to start a new life somewhere? Or is there another explanation we haven't considered? Drop your theories in the comments below. Your insights have helped solve cases before, and they might help bring closure to this one. If you found this investigation compelling, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have more unsolved mysteries coming your way, including next week's case about a missing college student whose doormate may know more than she's telling. Thanks for joining me for another Crime Vault investigation. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep seeking truth, and remember, someone out there knows what really happened to David Mitchell. I'm your host, and this has been Crime Vault. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next case.